Welcome to the Deploy Securely podcast, where we go deep on the cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance implications of using artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Walter Haydock, the founder of StackAware, and I'm joined, as always, by Steve DeFore. Steve, good to see you again.
You too, sir.
So, we've got a couple different topics to cover today. We've got some legislative updates, we've got some interesting hallucinations from AI, we've got some model releases upcoming from some of the hyperscalers. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Steve, so we can get right into it.
All right, there we go. So the first thing we're going to talk about, let me share my screen. Oh no. And we've seen similar stories as this one where somebody releases some sort of chatbot for their business, whether it be informational or to actually to help the end user achieve a specific goal or gather more information or whatever it happens to be. Uh, you would think that some of these companies would learn lessons from the other companies that have done this. I think there was a car vendor chatbot incident that happened where somebody was basically messaging back and forth with a chatbot. The chatbot ended up selling it to this person for something like $1 or something like that, and it got held up in court. Another one is the Southwest chatbot, where it ended up giving my wife a cookie recipe or something like
Mhm.
that. And so we have a similar story here from TripAdvisor, where the AI assistant, who's supposed to be helping the end user plan out their trip, giving them bad advice, right? And so it's such a similar story. I'm really surprised, and maybe you differ in this opinion. I'm really surprised this is still occurring so often, where these chatbots just go rogue and end up doing something that they're not supposed to do. In this case, this AI chatbot, like its sole function is to help somebody plan a trip, not necessarily a bad trip, right? So that's what this chatbot ends up doing. It uses the information and doesn't volunteer the rest of it. It's basically trying to make an overly negative hotel or venue or trip into a more positive experience. Like, some of the examples given here were a particular resort in another country was facing sexual harassment claims by its guests and neglected to actually tell the end user that. Um, Other ones, as shown in this particular photo, where just the conditions of the room itself were awful, and nobody would want want to stay there. So in the end, we're back to where we started. Don't use the AI chatbot. Go and use actual user reviews, right? Like, sort that by the lowest rating and just read, right? Um, because in the end, you're the one making the decision, and you're the one that's gonna have to deal with the negative outcome, if any.
Yep, always need to apply that human oversight to AI use. And sometimes AI isn't the right tool for the job. Sometimes a simple review of the star ratings will do.
And I get where they're coming from, when they want to help their end users, plan a trip, use the service, make it easier. And in the end, I don't like, mission failed.
Yep, sometimes there's just pure failure. And hopefully we learn from it and move on. Cool. Speaking of moving on, should we jump into the next topic?
Go for it.
Yeah, so big news out of Illinois. They, I will share my screen. They just passed a new law called SB 315, which is the Artificial Intelligence Safety Measures Act. It has some interesting requirements around building in a frontier framework for hyperscalers, mainly those over $500 million in annual revenue. So OpenAI, Anthropic, those types of firms will be caught up in this requirement, but a key new development is that it mandates an independent third party audit for these frontier frameworks. And I actually did some digging into it on the bill's requirements, and the bill is interesting because it actually makes it kind of tough to do the third party audit, the independent third party audit, and of course, this podcast is sponsored by Stackaware, so you're going to get a little bit of Stack Aware advertising in here, but essentially it requires an independent third party audit of the frontier model. But at the same time, it requires that third party to render advice and recommendations on how to improve the frontier framework. So, under rubrics like ISO 42001 or high trust AI security, the assessor or the auditor is not allowed to give consulting recommendations on how to implement the framework. They basically just go in and say, are you meeting the standard? Are you not meeting the standard? So I think that creates an interesting dynamic for companies that are seeking to meet the requirements of this new bill. I will say that Stackware has helpfully put together a new guide on how hyperscalers can meet the ISO or the 315 requirements and ISO 42001. So, bottom line, I think doing an internal audit using ISO 42001 and SB 315 together is the way to achieve the requirements of the bill. And I think that the traditional audit firms might actually be hesitant to get involved in this because they might contaminate the management system with their consulting advice, and then they couldn't then audit it afterwards. So I think that's interesting. We're seeing all sorts of these requirements popping up all over the place. We've seen California with the Transparency and Frontier Artificial Intelligence Act. We've seen New York with the RAISE Act. So we're seeing the states building their own AI governance frameworks for the frontier models, and then also for kind of smaller players that are deploying AI systems. Colorado with their revised SB 189. So a lot of stuff in flight, and staying on top of all these requirements is certainly challenging, but if you need help, talk to Stackaware.
Yeah, it's very interesting. All the states releasing their own, and there's really no federal government guidance. Like it's really good potentially for business from an overall standpoint, but like you said, keeping track of all the state requirements can be pretty tedious. That first point you made where it had a requirement for an external assessment, um, did it give in any guidance on what qualifies what, or sorry, let me rephrase that. Did it give any guidance on the qualifications of the external assessor? Like, could it be my neighbor who's a firefighter? You know what I mean?
That's a good question. So actually, what I'll do, I'll just pull up the full text of the bill, and we can talk through it because it basically just says the qualifications are they need to be qualified. Yeah, yeah. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I'll pull this up in a second. Uh, yeah, they must be qualified by being qualified. All right. Can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, it says the third party shall conduct audits consistent with general accepted standards, and then uh, shall possess demonstrated competence to perform the audit, including experience employing or contracting with the individuals who possess technical experience in the safety of frontier models. So you shall be competent by being competent.
Yeah,
Probably because
that's
I don't think the Illinois legislature knows what an audit of a frontier AI framework would look like.
right. And I don't like the word best practice in there. Like, so like
Yeah.
I learned this a couple of years ago, like during one of my educational ventures. There's common practice, then there's the application of the common practice within the context of your company, right? where it becomes your best practice, right? Because like imagine if we all had 7-factor authentication and cat cards and like all this stuff, like we wouldn't be able to get any work done, kind of like the federal government. But yeah, expertise in the safety of frontier models. That's like first thing that popped into my head were these job requirements where like the new technology has only been out for 2 years, but they require 7 years of it,
Yeah.
type of thing. It's like they're
7 years of Claude Code experience.
right, right, exactly. Like, um, yeah, it's very interesting. Did this say when it actually goes live?
So this bill goes into force January 1st, 2027, and then starting January 1st, 2028 is when you need to start doing these audits.
So there's plenty of time to become an expert. This is the notice to everybody in what'd you say? Illinois?
Yeah, or well, I mean, anywhere really, because you don't need to, it doesn't say you have to be in Illinois. You could
Oh,
doesn't even say you need to be in the United States. You could be anywhere.
oh, so it's that broad. Oh man, this is awful. Oh, like I said, plenty of time to become an expert in all the things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't compete with Stackware because we'll crush you. But aside from that, you know, go for it. So cool. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on to LinkedIn.
All right.
My favorite social media platform. It's actually my only social media platform.
Yeah.
Does LinkedIn count as social media?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's being social, I guess. All right. So the next thing to talk about, and I'm going to completely butcher this individual's name. Feel free to correct me. Um, Yoon Ashley? I don't know.
I don't know.
Uh, eh, it's fine. So this individual is the chair, Department of Medicine for Stanford University, as well as the founding director for Center for Inherited Cardiovascular Disease at Stanford Health. That is their credentials. He posted on LinkedIn 2 days ago about a study that he and a group of scientists did. I think it was back in 2009, whenever they started, and then the actual published study came out in 2011. What it boils down to is they did genomic discovery and analysis, and it took them 9 months to complete the study with 30 people on staff, like 30 scientists, right? So again, it took them 9 months. They replicated the same study using Claude in 30 minutes. This is I'm not saying that everybody out there in the scientific community should do this, but this is a really good approach where a group of experts went out and did a thing using their expertise and then attempted to perform the same study using artificial intelligence, right? And that would be the ideal situation. That way you can weigh the two separate outcomes. And also, you could potentially use Claude to look at your previous study and see if you missed anything, make it better, do an analysis to make sure that nothing was missed, whatever it happens to be. So I tend to tell a lot of negative stories where somebody failed. So I was really excited to see this one out there where we have a really good justification from a business sense for using artificial intelligence. So 9 months versus 30 minutes. And I think somewhere, yeah, at the bottom, it says the prompt was 180 words, 400,000 tokens were used, and it cost about $5.
Hmm.
Again, the practice people using artificial intelligence probably want to pick up on is the human review of an expert on the output and the final results of whatever it is you're using artificial intelligence for. Because in this case, this particular individual, let's just say Dr. Ashley, right? Because I'll butcher his first name again, um, did the analysis on his own genome and replicated it, right? In your particular, and this is for listeners out there, in your particular business case, it might not be appropriate to perform um, a parallel study or parallel business case using artificial intelligence without making sure your terms and conditions, your NDAs, your BAs, whatever they happen to be, um, are appropriate and aligned to the expectations of your clients, especially if you're the custodian of some particular data set. We were talking about this earlier. If it's your own data, go for it. It's the United States. You have that freedom to make that choice and you use your data as you please. Just know that the ramifications of using something like Claude, you might be giving up your privacy and security for the sake of an experiment. But I think this is a really good example of um, what we're going to see in the future, where we have these business cases, whether they be scientific in nature or not, and we're going to have outcomes that justify the cost and like we as a species might benefit from it, right? So uh, I'm not, I'm not sure if the listeners or you are familiar, like Mars Corporation, like the candy bar corporation, their supply chain in manufacturing candy has a lot to do with crop resilience to pests, insects, or even weather and climate, right? So Mars and other companies are very, very invested in genome sequencing and other things like that, basically supply chain security, right? So they will invest a ton of money and a ton of effort to do those particular studies where we all benefit, right? Like the candy corporations, of course, but at the same time, just in general food, just look at the peanut, right? The peanut is of course like in peanut butter and all kinds of candies, but in general, just food. So I think if companies take this approach, specifically the companies that have a vested interest in the food and supply chain, um, as well as just like the food we consume at home, we'll just be better off as human beings.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I think there's huge potential for using AI for healthcare purposes, as obviously both you and I are quite familiar with from our work. And I think on the genomic side, it's great to see that there's a lot of labor and cost savings from this approach. I will say that interestingly enough, the hyperscalers OpenAI and Anthropic, I think last month put out a letter talking about the risk of genomic bioweapons being created using AI. And that's kind of the flip side of this picture. I'm a little bit of a tinfoil hat when it comes to my genome, in that I'm the most breached man in America. I think my fingerprints were stolen in the OPM hack, so they're sitting in a Chinese intelligence service database right now. But the one thing that I think I've kept from getting stolen so far is my genome, and I am going to try very hard to keep that private. And I probably wouldn't dump that into a commercial version of Claude, which I'm assuming this is, with kind of the consumer with the consumer terms, without any obligation to confidentiality. And I don't know what the data retention terms are. So do your risk reward analysis, look at the terms and conditions, evaluate what the risks are. Maybe he's like, hey, my genome's everywhere. I mean, it looks like he even posted like what his he had an illness, a genetic disease. uh
Yeah,
you know More power to you if you want to be that transparent. That's all well and good. I think we're going to see, in the United States, with healthcare, we have kind of the worst system possible, in that we have all the negatives of a heavily regulated system. So there are lots of rules that kind of impede innovation, and then at the same time, we also have the kind of the cutthroat profit motive. So combining the two, you have really expensive healthcare that isn't super good, in my opinion. And I think that you can substantiate that through the data. And over time, I think frankly, like the insurance offerings, the health insurance offerings are just going to collapse, because people can't afford them, and then the people that are on them are the ones who need the healthcare the most. The healthy people aren't getting health insurance, and the whole point of Obamacare and things like that was to balance the risk, to share the risk. And since there's no penalty, there's no financial penalty for not having health insurance, a lot of people aren't going to. And then there are all sorts of alternative offerings. There's like MediShare, which is a faith-based crowdfunding platform. There are kind of non-religious ones as well out there that are not health insurance, and they do things like they exclude people over a certain BMI, which you can't do with health insurance. And I think those types of platforms are going to be enabled by AI to be very discerning in terms of who they let in, and they're outside the existing insurance frameworks and regulations. And you can say, hey, you won't have catastrophic cap, you won't have all this type of stuff if you go with one of those options. But if you're talking to somebody who just simply can't afford that type of insurance, they're going to say, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to go with the option that I can't afford. It'll help me with some of the smaller bills. And I think we're going to see AI, for lack of a better term, profiling and underwriting, uh, kind of enter the market that way, rather than through the traditional insurance providers. And I think those companies are frankly going to need to find a new business model, because their product is just not very good. So I think AI will help, but it will also hurt some people because genetic diseases, pre-existing conditions, those can be excluded from these non-insurance products that a lot of people are going to start relying on.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's, I think, where the human discernment portion of it comes in, because to your point, let's say I upload my entire genome to something and it gets leaked or whatever. It's just out there on the internet. Public S3 bucket, everybody has access to it. And my insurer, my insurer downloads it, does an analysis, and I might have a genetic predisposition to a terminal illness or something like that and deny me care. But I would want a human to review that, because just because you have a genetic predisposition to something doesn't mean it's going to occur,
Well,
right?
that's
Like,
actually illegal right now, what you just
right.
described. That is
Uh,
illegal currently. Yeah.
right. It
Yeah.
just, like, it completely baffles me. Like, the term profile is very scary to me, I should
Mhm.
say, like creating
Yeah.
profiles of individuals and groups of people.
Yeah.
Um, Very scary stuff.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the right answer is. I mean, I always, something that I say that sometimes people look at me a little cockeyed when I say it, but it's like anytime that you start to regulate insurance, you're basically kind of defeating the purpose of it, because insurance is a predictive activity. It's You're saying, over this period of time, this number of people are going to have this type of condition, or they're going to suffer this type of loss. And then when the government comes in and starts saying, "Whoa, hold on, you can only incorporate these certain factors, you can't incorporate these other factors," like for example with healthcare, you can only incorporate age, zip code, and tobacco status, and perhaps gender. I'm not sure if that's correct, but you can't incorporate cardiovascular exercise. You can't incorporate sleep. You can't incorporate all this stuff that's like incredibly predictive of health. You can incorporate diet into your underwriting by law. And the government's like, well, you should predict, you should make these predictions, but we're going to tie one hand behind your back about how you make them. On the other hand, I understand people don't want information to be used against them, especially if there's nothing they can do about it. It's one thing, frankly, if it's like how much you're exercising, because everyone can do something. You can, even if you're disabled, you can do something. You can do more than nothing. And yeah, I get that people don't want their information used against them, but at the same time, like if you're going to limit how you can make predictions using artificial intelligence or otherwise, then just understand that the outcomes are not going to be as good. And I think we've kind of drifted too far in one direction in the United States.
Yeah, and for those watching that don't understand what we're talking about, look at your vehicle insurance. right? So you may never get into a wreck and obey every speed limit, and you stop at all the stop signs, never get a ticket, never get in trouble, but you find your insurance continuously going up. You'll see whenever you get vehicle insurance, they'll grab your gender, your name, driver's license number, so they can see how many speeding tickets you have, and they create a profile on you based on who you are, not necessarily like like all the variations of who you are, like weight and things like that, just things applicable to driving, including your zip code. And then sometimes you'll have these insurers who will ask how far do you have to commute on a daily basis to and from work, and things like that, to create this profile that are that ends up getting compared to other profiles, so on and so forth, to figure out your rate. So you may never get into a car wreck or have any type of like negative um, vehicle outcome or anything like that. But you're paying for the rest that do within your particular profile. So that's really what we're talking about. Um, yeah, but like you said, pros and cons for both in this case. But yeah, I think you're 100% right. Don't leak your own genome out on the internet. Only bad can come from it potentially. Yeah.
I mean, hey, if free country, if you decide the reward is worth the risk, then by all means do it. But that's just my personal threat model at this point, having been so thoroughly breached at this point in my life. Cool. You want to move on?
Yeah. What's the next one?
Yeah. So next one is the release of GPT 5.6 that is going to be coming out tomorrow. And it's the GPT is going to release the Sol, Terra, and Luna models for 5.6, which apparently they underwent some government testing. There's a select group of organizations whose participation has been shared with the government, and there will be broad access coming out. We don't believe this type of government access should become the long term default, OpenAI said. And I think this is very interesting considering it comes on the heels of the export restrictions that were levied against Anthropic for Fable 5 and Mythos 5, which basically forced them to shut down access globally. And also, the White House made some comments about how there would be an FDA for AI from the director of the National Economic Council, but then many people in the administration came back and said, no, there's going to be no FDA for AI. But looks like there is some sort of pre-release testing going on, and there was a post facto government order demanding that Anthropic take down access for some of its models, and there are costs associated with that. So maybe we are kind of drifting toward something of an FDA for AI in all but name. And that's kind of the worst approach, because when you have this shadow regulatory system where it's kind of like, you do something and then you get punished after the fact because you did something that you didn't know you weren't supposed to do, that kind of chills innovation. So I think we should I think we should revisit this and say, are we creating an FDA for AI? And if so, let's do it. But if not, let's not. And then there's another article that I'll share that, yeah, the outgoing AI advisor for the Trump administration, Sriram Krishnan, he said, there White House won't create an FDA for AI, but you know, I'm seeing something different. So I would say to the administration, let's get our story straight here and decide whether the government is going to get involved in AI regulation and to what extent. And if so, then let's have a national framework. Let's have a bill that goes through Congress, that gets negotiated, that preempts the state laws. But the current approach is not super desirable. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and the situation that you described creates a lot of uncertainty, right? So like anything you want to enforce, needs to be written down and approved, right? So like at the organizational level, we're talking about like policies, right? These are the positive good behaviors you want at your company, right? Like the company shall, right, do all of these things. If you don't have that written down at your company and have appropriate training, nobody really knows what to do until they mess up and it's after the fact, right? So like this parallels exactly what you said, and it creates a lot of uncertainty on a path forward. And so like according to the articles and like what you've read, this really seems like even the government doesn't know what to do whenever a particular thing can be used for both positive and negative outcomes, right? Like, oh, we can use this thing, right? Like to help drive business and like find genomic like data analysis. We can save months of time, like and do all these things. And at the same time, to your point earlier, it can be weaponized in the same industry or different industries or whatever it happens to be. It can take this good thing and turn it bad. So my question to you is, what do we do? Like, let's say hypothetically that your company has frontier models that are more than capable. Um, like, it really seems like an overreach for the federal government to force any company to pull something, right? Because if you think about it, everything is dual use, right? So like a vehicle, like a knife, a gun, whatever it happens to be, um, and they're looking for some kind of regulation to, I guess, prevent access, but also maybe limit the actions based on potentially a user profile or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Everything can be dual use. I think the Anthropic situation is pretty interesting because, in my opinion, Anthropic wanted a regulatory regime in place that would essentially create an oligopoly where OpenAI, Anthropic, maybe Google and Microsoft and Amazon were kind of allowed to have these super powerful AI models that could,
Tech giants.
yeah, tech giants that could deploy advanced cyber capabilities, things like that, and basically create this mass of regulation that would prevent any sort of upstart from breaking through because they would need to meet all these regulatory requirements. And I think a lot of the, frankly, fear mongering from, especially from Anthropic, but also from OpenAI, was a result of that. And the blowback that occurred as a result of this Commerce Department order on export control, it potentially kind of gave them a little bit of a black eye and kind of reminded them of potentially the fact that it's a double-edged sword. If you are going out and kind of making these pronouncements, then maybe people will start listening to you actually and doing things about it. If you say that that Mythos is a reckoning for cybersecurity and it's so dangerous, then maybe the government's going to say, okay, well, we'll believe you on that, and we're going to ban any non-U.S. citizens from using this tool. So I think I think the hyperscalers should be careful in what they wish for, and and trying to build those regulatory moats because they can get caught up in them, certainly, as we've seen. And again, it just goes back to, we need a national framework for AI governance, and the president should submit a bill to Congress and get it through the process and pass it into law. And then we can all say, this is what we've agreed on. This is what we're going to do. It's all very piecemeal at this point.
Yeah. Uh, Making it up as you go along. And some of it, like I think it was the Colorado bill, they found it was unenforceable. Like nobody actually knew how to do it. So they went back to the drawing board. Um, yeah, it's very interesting that the Anthropic and then I think first it was Anthropic, then it was OpenAI talking about their models that have a reckoning for cybersecurity. This answers the question of what happens when your marketing goes too far, right? Like there's difference between the fear-based portion of it, right? Like sure, grounded in reality, At the same time, the really, really good example of what happens when somebody actually believes you, right? And I was excited whenever those announcements came. I was like, oh, we can make our products better. We can secure this on behalf of our customers who trust us to do the appropriate thing. And at the same time, think about the future of subscription models. So, like, I remember before any subscriptions, you had to pay $700 to Adobe for Photoshop on disk, right? But it was one and done and it was yours, right? Now we have subscription models where pretty much everything on the planet is now subscription based, which is both good and bad, right? So instead of having the upfront cost, you get to pay monthly from it for it. So whenever you have these models that you end up depending on, whether it be for a particular workflow operationally or revenue generating or even um, cybersecurity related, which we might fall into the operational category. When you become dependent, and that's why I call these things dependencies, dependence on a particular third party to provide something of value. That way, you yourself can create value. They're you're basically at the will and mercy of them, right? So just like Netflix did, and just like YouTube did, they have a particular price point. They want you to become dependent on their particular systems, then they're going to up the cost of it because somebody's got to pay for all these things. That's one of the reasons why they're building all the data centers, right? Everybody is using these, they're becoming dependent on it, and they see the opportunity there. Not like some conspiracy theorist, it just happens, right? Like we're at a particular price point here. In the future, it's going to be larger, more expensive, and you're going to be forced to pay for it.
It's true. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on to some Chinese robots. All right, let's see your window. I think it's this one. Let me know if you, yeah, it's that one. All right. So I saw this in one of my news feeds, or maybe Crystal sent it over. Very exciting stuff as far as robotics go. So Chinese company UB Tech has the U1 series robot that they released. I want to say like maybe close to close to 2 weeks ago at a robotics conference, and they were one of the presenters. Why this is important is because they have, I want to say, 3 or 4 tiers of robots. All of them have embedded large language models within them. So the first tier looks very odd. No arms or legs. It's just this torso and this head is conversational. And so uh, what they displayed was this particular robot is placed at a desk at the entrance of a business. That way, somebody walking in can ask questions of it, check in for an appointment, find directions to a particular office, whatever it happens to be. Lowest price point. Highest price point is a robot with arms, legs, torso, head, large language model embedded. And the demonstration that they showed for, I guess, the dexterity of the robot uh, was a real human being dancing with the robot. It was pretty impressive. And one of the reasons why they're doing this research, so there's a combination of things, right? Business efficiency would be one of the reasons, but on the more human side, there's a problem within China of the aging population. And so what that means is there's a lot of older people alone and isolated. And so if you're alone and isolated and you're getting up there in age, there's a lot of mental health problems that happen. So this is one of their solutions to giving, I guess, those isolated and or older companionship. And so you can basically purchase a companionship robot to have conversations with and get that particular interaction um, for the sake of mental health. On the other hand, um, this opens up so much risk as as far as the future holds. So, for example, we've already seen the large language models going rogue, giving giving bad advice, um, collecting information without our consent. And I understand that China is a little bit different as as far as the way the country is run and operated. It's just very concerning when you have potentially somebody of the older generation that doesn't necessarily understand technology talking to this robot because it has voice capabilities and language capabilities and understanding that it might be inappropriate not to volunteer information um, to this particular entity. So I have 4 links to put in the chat. Again, great opportunity here to help humanity, but at the same time, um, much larger privacy implications there. But again, uh, I am hopeful for the future with things like this. I'll put all 4 of these links, including a couple of YouTube videos in the chat. Oh yeah, here's the image of the armless and legless torso.
That's a little freaky.
Yeah, it is. But this this thing, I'm not sure if you use any of the voice chats in AI or anything like that. I do. Sometimes, like when I'm driving and I want to um, know about a particular topic, it's like, hey, tell me all about this news article, or tell me about the U.S. men's soccer team, or whatever it happens to be, right? That way, I can still be hands free. Um, I'm really curious about what China is going to do as far as like the security and privacy of these things, because some of them are um, very coordinated and could potentially help you around the house, right? Then also, some of them can be trained on what you do and how you do it. So, for example, if I'm an older fellow and I have problems grasping a glass or something to that effect because of hand issue due to age or injury or whatever it happens to be, I can show it multiple times how to do it, how I want it arranged, so on and so forth, and then it just does it, right? So then it's going to have potentially access to your home, access to, hey, we saw this with all the agentic stuff, right? So I spin up the MCP server and I've got agents like doing all this stuff. It has access to my credit card information, personal information, whatever it happens to be. What could it not do with all of this information? And then combine that with the age and not really understanding really what's going on and what the capability of these things, quite concerning. So like, do you have any knowledge of how China is regulating artificial intelligence or anything like that? Sorry to put you on the spot. That wasn't rehearsed. It's on the spot question for Walter Haydock.
China has passed a range of laws with respect to AI and data privacy, and you know, to what extent they are for show and what extent they are actually being honored, I think is an interesting question as well. So, frankly, that's not something that I can't drill deeply into it, but definitely, certainly fodder for our future podcast. I think would be worthwhile.
Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, because one of the companies I previously worked for had actually multiple ones, had multiple data centers over in China, and they're they were at the mercy of whoever ran the data center. In this case, Chinese government enforced a particular restriction on Chinese consumer data, and it could not leave the country. So, and you had to rent a space within the Chinese data center, and then you weren't allowed to even view some of the stuff. We had to use remote desktop to even view some of that data for
Mm,
analysis purposes and things like
mm,
that. Even then, it was only like a handful of companies where it wasn't Microsoft Windows remote desktop. It was some other third
mm.
party that was on a very short approved list and things like that. I imagine
Interesting.
it's going to be something like that, but again, we can go in the deep dive on a later episode there.
Sounds good, man. Well, with that, I think we can wrap up for the day. I appreciate you jumping on as always and talking through the latest and greatest in AI and governance, risk, compliance, cybersecurity, and privacy. So, this has been the Deploy Securely podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.